What if I told you that one day, without even realizing it, you bought the most expensive thing in your life? It doesn't come in a box, and you can't return it, yet it follows you for the rest of your days. And here's the irony. You're not the customer. You're the raw material. Grab your tea or coffee and listen closely, because today we're talking about the quietest form of money. Debt. The invisible product. Debt. This isn't your usual borrow and payback story. Debt is one of the most profitable inventions in human history. You can't touch it, you can't see it, but it's always there. It doesn't build factories, it doesn't hire workers, it doesn't produce anything. And yet, it never stops making money. The strangest part is, most people don't even realize it exists. Debt is invisible because it has become normal. Like the air we breathe, no one questions where it comes from, but we all live trapped in a system that cannot survive without it. Debt isn't just a financial tool. It's the fuel of wars, the foundation of empires, the silent chain that shapes the fate of nations. Civilizations rise and fall because of it. Debt is power. Debt is control. And today almost everyone lives inside this system without even noticing. At its simplest, debt is just a promise. I'll take it today and I'll pay tomorrow. But that simple promise became one of history's greatest manipulations, because interest doesn't just sell money, it sells time. To live today, you mortgage your tomorrow. And that's the heartbeat of modern finance. Even in ancient times, people understood the danger. In Mesopotamia, debts were carved into clay tablets, but the rulers realized something important. When debt piles up and people suffocate, the system collapses. So every once in a while, they declared a debt forgiveness. Every account was reset. Society could breathe again. Even the Hebrew Bible carries this idea. Every 50 years, all debts must be erased. Because when debt breaks the balance of society, even the state cannot stand. But as history moved on, humanity discovered something new. Instead of erasing debt, they learned to use it for power. And from that moment, debt stopped being a promise. It became a weapon. In the hands of kings, popes, and bankers, it became the perfect tool. Some rose with it, others were crushed beneath it. Debt was no longer just a number. It had become the quietest empire in human history. From the Middle Ages to 1006, 194, debt turns into power. As time went on, debt stopped being a personal matter. Kings, merchants, and bankers all discovered its power. But not everyone used that power the same way. For ordinary people, debt was a burden they carried on their backs. For the powerful, it was a way to make others carry it for them. In medieval Europe, the Catholic Church forbade lending money with interest. Usury was considered a sin. To make money from money was seen as defying God. But wherever there are rules, there are ways around them. Merchants soon found one. They disguised loans as trade deals. Interest was hidden between the lines of contracts. Money was not supposed to grow by itself, but people found new names to make it possible. And those who mastered this new game became the world's first financial empires. During the Renaissance, the Medici family rose to power by perfecting it. They didn't conquer land or build armies. They lent money to kings, popes, and merchants. And in return, they gained not just interest, but influence. Because when you lend money to someone, you also shape the decisions they make. The Medicis understood this rule long before anyone else. Debt was no longer just an economic tool. It had become political power itself. A kingdom's fate was no longer decided on the battlefield, but at the banker's desk. Then came the real revolution. By the 17th century, debt was no longer the weapon of individuals. It had become the weapon of nations. During its war for independence against Spain, The Dutch Republic tried something completely new. The state borrowed money directly from its own citizens. The people lent to their government, and the government promised to pay them interest. These debts could even be traded like goods. Debt was no longer a burden. It was now an investment. Wars no longer depended on a king's treasure. They could be financed by selling the future. England quickly copied the idea, and in 1694, history's most important financial institution was born, the Bank of England. It made the state's debt permanent, and for the first time there was a power higher than kings, the system of debt itself. Governments learned to live on credit. Bankers gained power by lending to them. And when a government couldn't pay, there was always one final solution: taxes. In the end, every debt found its way back to the people. The cycle worked perfectly. The state borrowed, bankers profited, and citizens paid the price. Wars continued, the system grew. Debt was no longer a tool. It had become the invisible mechanism that ruled the world. The 20th century. Selling debt to the masses. By the 20th century, debt had escaped the hands of kings and bankers. It had entered the lives of ordinary people. The person on the street was now part of the same machine. Owning a home, buying a car, sending a child to school, everything was now made possible through debt. Banks and governments called it progress. Credit cards were marketed as symbols of freedom. Buy now, pay later. Don't postpone your dreams. These weren't just advertisements. They were ideas planted deep in the public mind. Debt was no longer a responsibility. It had become a measure of success. Behind that idea was a massive transformation. After the Second World War, the Bretton Woods system was created. It turned debt into a tool for global direction. The International Monetary Fund and the World Bank were born. On paper, their goal was stability and prosperity. In reality, the more money countries borrowed, the more dependent they became. The IMF offered aid packages, but always with conditions. Cut spending. Privatize, open your markets. They called it structural adjustment, but in truth it was the surrender of economic sovereignty. At the same time, banks began a quieter revolution. Consumer debt. Debt was no longer the business of governments. It had become the business of households. Mortgages turned into the dream of the middle class. Credit cards were sold as freedom, but they were really invisible chains. You were free, only up to your credit limit. Debt became the heartbeat of society. Lenders always won. Borrowers always paid. But no one noticed because everyone was playing the same game. Banks didn't want debts to end. A paid debt brings no profit, but a renewed, extended, or restructured debt is an endless source of income. Governments also avoided raising taxes. They simply borrowed more. Central banks lowered interest rates, printed money, and kept the system alive. Debt was no longer a temporary tool. It had become the permanent infrastructure of modern life. And the greatest irony of all, everyone was in debt, but everyone acted as if they were happy. The age of debt addiction and crises. By the 1970s, the world had learned to live with debt. But this was no habit. It was an addiction. Governments, corporations, even ordinary people were now breathing inside a system that could no longer grow without borrowing. When the oil crises hit, dollars flooded into Western banks. They were called petrodollars. The banks didn't want to keep that mountain of money sitting still. They began lending it around the world. Take it. Invest. Develop, they said. But no one asked the question. Can you pay it back? When interest rates were low, everyone looked like a genius. But in the early 1980s, the U.S. Federal Reserve Chairman, Paul Volcker, raised interest rates to the highest levels in history to fight inflation, and suddenly the mountain of debt began to crumble. The first domino was Mexico. In 1982, it said, "We can't pay." Then came Brazil, Argentina, Chile. One by one, all of Latin America sank into a debt crisis. The solution: more debt. The IMF stepped in with rescue packages, but they came with heavy conditions. Austerity, wage freezes, cuts to public services. The result was simple. The people became poorer, but the banks got their money back. It was a new kind of colonialism, not with guns, but with interest rates. Meanwhile, in the West, another revolution was taking place. The financial world had discovered a new miracle: the selling of debt itself. Banks no longer just lent money and waited for interest. They started packaging loans, slicing them up, and selling them to investors. This process was called securitization. Home loans, car loans, corporate debt, all turned into products for trade. Debt was no longer an agreement between two sides. It had become a commodity, bought and sold on the open market. For a while, everyone seemed to be winning. But the risk was invisible. A massive chain of debt had formed, and no one knew which link would break first. Then came 2008. The chain snapped. Millions of Americans couldn't pay their mortgages. Home prices collapsed. Banks stood on the edge of failure. Trillions of dollars vanished overnight. Families lost their homes, their jobs, their savings. But the big players of the system were rescued. Governments used taxpayers' money to save the banks. A crisis created by debt was once again solved with more debt. Central banks cut interest rates to zero and printed trillions. But that money wasn't used to rebuild economies. It was used to keep the debt system alive. Ironically, the crisis didn't destroy the system, it made it stronger. Because now everyone knew one thing: no matter what happens, governments will always save the banks. Today, global debt has passed $300 trillion. That's 3 times the world's total annual production. Politicians still call it growth. But the truth is simple. We are not living in prosperity. We are living in comfort borrowed from the future, the digital age and real freedom. Today, debt is no longer just a part of the economy. It has become the economy itself. Everything from production to wages, from trade to savings, now revolves around debt in one form or another. Even money itself is nothing more than trust wearing the mask of debt. Once upon a time, debt was the business of states and the wealthy. Now, it quietly lives in everyone's daily life. A generation buys its homes, cars, education, even vacations on credit. And no one finds that strange anymore. Because debt has become normal, the greatest transformation of any society happens when the extraordinary becomes ordinary. And modern civilization has achieved exactly that. But now a new era is emerging: the digital age of debt. Central banks are working on digital currencies. It sounds like technological progress, but in truth, it could deepen the system's control over people even more. Digital money is not just an invisible number, it is a programmable code. One day, an algorithm could decide when, where, and how you can spend your own money. A loan could be approved or denied within seconds. Interest rates could change instantly based on your personal data. All of this will be sold to the public as efficiency. But efficiency usually means freedom for the creditor and restriction for the debtor. Debt is no longer just a financial relationship. It has become a behavioral one. People are no longer measured by their wealth, but by their credit scores and reliability. Those who pay on time are trusted. Those who don't are quietly excluded from the system. In this new age, debt doesn't just shape your wallet, it shapes your identity. And just like in the past, this system is being built silently. The secret contracts of old bankers have now become the digital codes of modern central banks. The name has changed, but the essence remains the same: control through debt. The only difference is that today debt is not only invisible, it is traceable, every second. That is why the digital era might not be an age of progress, but an age of quiet supervision. And if we are not careful, our freedoms, just like interest itself, could slowly erode away. The final lesson: real freedom. History keeps reminding us of one simple truth. Debt is never neutral. One person's gain is another's burden. One person's future is another's profit today. Debt turns time into money. It trades tomorrow's labor for today's comfort. It feels like freedom, but it is really a chain, a quiet dependency wrapped in convenience. Debt is more than economics. It shapes behavior. It uses fear, desire, hope, and impatience. At first it inspires you, then it takes control. No empire ever built a system of control as lasting as debt, but no system survives without belief. Debt does not stand on gold or numbers, it stands on trust. As long as people believe in the system, it works. But when that trust fades, the illusion breaks. Today the world runs on faith. Faith in money, in credit, in the promise to repay. The system calls it growth, but it is really just sustainable debt. Real financial freedom is not about earning more, it is about depending less. Easy money, low interest, endless promises. They all whisper the same thing: stay in the system. But sometimes freedom begins with one simple word: no, just no. To live without debt may seem like a luxury, but it is the oldest form of freedom. Paying off debt feels like relief. Refusing new debt feels like liberation. History never repeats exactly, but its rhythm never changes, from clay tablets to credit cards. The story remains the same. Debt is a game with a fixed winner, and in the end one question remains: who truly owes whom? Do the banks owe us, or do we owe them? Or are we all serving an invisible system together? Maybe the real question is this: what do we believe in? Money, the system, or ourselves? If this story gave you a new perspective, do not forget to like the video and subscribe, because history already holds the answers. I am just here to remind you where to look.